Okay. Welcome again, everybody. My name is Sarah Burns. I'm the director of the Resident Leadership Academy at the Mel King Institute. Today, we're going to be talking about capital improvement plans for local housing authorities with Stephanie Brynan. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Okay, great. From DHCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development. And we have been offering trainings and webinars for residents for about 5 years. Today is the first time we're welcoming board members as well. So some folks are residents, some folks are board members, and some folks are resident board members on the call today. So just want to make sure everyone keeps their line muted if you don't mind. Folks are already doing a great job with that. And if you want to, you can put your name and housing authority in the chat so we can see where everybody is from. We will be sending around the slides after the presentation, and we are recording this. And there will be time for Q&A at the end. So if folks don't mind holding their questions, we'll have some of those at the end. I think that is all I need to say. And from here, I'm just going to pass it on over to Stephanie.
Well, thank you. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. This is my first time kind of doing this particular presentation, although I know the process very well. So I can definitely answer all of your questions. I just haven't had the joy of being able to present it to you guys before. So this is really exciting. I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to share my screen so that we can follow. Here we go. So I can actually do my presentation. And I already sent it to Sarah, which means, where is it? I'll just do this. Okay, can you guys see? Uh-oh, hold on.
We can see it.
Can you see the presentation, or are you seeing my screen?
We're seeing it like as if you're in editing mode.
Ah, perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
Then I just hadn't started it yet. Okay.
Yeah, so now we're seeing like both.
Now it's the, yeah, hold on.
Yep.
Where is it? Sorry.
No problem.
Hold on. It's supposed to. Here. That should, nope. This is, for some reason, it is not giving me. No. Oh, this is really, okay. You know what? I think I have the way to fix this. Hold on one sec. I'll share my other screen.
Yeah, that often is a trick.
All right. Okay, can you guys see the green trees now?
Yep.
Yes.
Awesome. All right, here we go. Okay, I think that's working.
Perfect.
Okay, so you know, again, thanks for having me. And I'm here to give you an overview of how our capital plans work, but I'm also going to give you a little bit of background on DHCD and how we're kind of structured to support the work in your housing authorities. So as you guys might know, Department of Housing and Community Development's Division of Public Housing is split into two main bureaus. One is Housing Management and the other is Housing Development and Construction. Most of the reports that you guys get fall under Housing Management. They're the ones who are doing the PMRs or doing the assessments that go out. If you guys have any tenant questions and whatnot, you go to a housing management specialist. However, capital improvement plans fall under the Bureau of Housing Development and Construction, which is my side of the shop. And you know, the Bureau of Housing Development and Construction is made up of project managers, architects and engineers, and construction advisors. And every LHA has a person assigned from each unit helping to make these capital projects move forward. And so the housing authorities themselves are really familiar with their teams of DHCD construction staff, like capital staff. We really try to keep in contact with housing authorities, mod directors, or executive directors throughout the whole lifespan of the project. So we try to work as closely together with everybody as we can to make sure that the actual needs of the site are addressed. You also might be familiar with our regional capital assistance teams, or RCATs. Housing authorities with under 500 state agent public housing units have the option of being part of the RCAT team. RCATs are deployed, they're kind of subcontractors for DHCD, and they have their own teams of project managers. They help housing authorities put their CIPs, their annual, the CIP stands for Capital Improvement Plan, sorry. And the RCATs work with the housing authorities every year to put their CIPs together, and they serve as a resource, an ongoing resource for all housing authorities that are assigned to them. We have 3 RCAT teams, and each cover their own geographical areas. You can see, the different colors. As you can see, not all of housing authorities fall under the category or the purview of RCATs. And each one has their own teams, like I said, of project managers, although the RCATs themselves, if they are working on jobs and they're project managing jobs, they are also serving as construction advisors and sometimes even designers, depending on the job and the situation. So what is a capital improvement plan? It's a report that's submitted every year to DHCD, and it's put together by the housing authority, usually in partnership with the RCATs. And it's a tool that we develop to help housing authorities create a pipeline for their upcoming construction projects and to be able to plan ahead for spending. Every year, housing authorities get a certain amount of funds from us, and that it determines how much we have to spend on capital projects for each housing authority. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about how that's figured out in just a second. A completed CIP is a 5-year plan, and it identifies capital projects, planning scopes, schedule, and budget for each capital projects, and identifies where the funding comes from. An approved CIP is required for any funding or payments to be made. So if something is just in the plan, but it hasn't been approved, then there's no real vehicle for us to be able to authorize and or pay for any capital work that happens at a housing authority. There are in general, DHCD has 2 different kinds of funding types. There are our capital funds, and those are things that support construction projects at the housing authorities buildings. And some kind of examples of that are like, these are large scale projects that really change the overall fixtures and nature of the building itself. So you have roof replacements, you have paving, you have elevator repairs, installation of new windows, all of these things that are kind of core to the structure of the building. Operating funds, which are managed by the housing management side of the shop, those are more day-to-day costs. Those are like, maintenance upkeep, snow removal, paying of admin staff, those kinds of things. So for like one of the examples that we tend to use internally is the capital side would replace light fixtures, operating funds pay for the light bulbs. I mean, it's just the difference of day-to-day costs versus kind of larger structural changes. So our funding comes from state funds. On the capital side, we get a certain amount every year from the the state bond bills, and our spending is planned and allocated specifically by the Office for Administration and Finance. We refer to the bond cap because it's, all of our money is coming from bond bills, right? And so it's funded with long-term bonds that are repaid with tax revenue that the Commonwealth gets through the state operating budget. So, for example, in fiscal year 2020, the administration allocated us around $109.5 million in capital funds to help preserve and improve our structures across the Commonwealth. And I will show you, there are a couple of slides that follow that show you kind of how we manage the bond cap as a whole. I know it is a lot of money, and it still doesn't match the total need across the Commonwealth, which is really unfortunate, and something that we're always striving to kind of reconcile. Operating funds are funds that are appropriated each year through an annual budget process. They're dispersed to the housing authorities based on overall funding levels and allowable expenses, as part of, including rents and other kinds of expenses that are happening at the housing authority. Operating funds are funded by current year taxes. And the fiscal year 2020 Commonwealth budget provided $72 million in operating subsidy for local housing authorities. You'll note that last year, because of the pandemic, the numbers were very off. And so I'm still using fiscal year 2020 funds because it just makes more sense. That last year there were a lot of different ways where things were, especially on the capital side, a lot of our projects were held up and because we couldn't get out into the field. So and so the numbers were very different in terms of how we could spend everything. So if you want to look at capital funding levels spent over time, you'll see that, for example, in 2005 and 2006, even in 2007, we had spending levels between $40,000 and $60,000, right? And then finally in 2008, the numbers started to go up significantly because there were huge efforts to educate the legislature and the public around the huge need that housing authorities have faced in terms of the capital need. And so, as you can see over time, there have been, it's been a higher allocation. And in 2020, we were given, like I said, $109.5 million, which is the highest that we had seen in a long time, or as you can tell, ever. Which was so welcome, and unfortunately also still doesn't address the whole need of the portfolio. When we look at all of the funding that we have available to spend in a certain year, we have put it into very specific buckets. Formula funding is one of those buckets, and it's a housing authority's share of the overall bond cap that's allocated to them on an annual basis. So in one fiscal year, we have this whole calculation where we see how much money we have available. We have a database that housing authorities keep up to date that helps us understand what the need is. And we use that need and have an algorithm that basically determines exactly how much each housing authority has to spend, like what percentage of our bond cap that we can allocate to them. For fiscal year 20, the formula funding was budgeted at $52.5 million. So that's about half of the bond cap in general. And so, like I said, the amount of formula funds that a housing authority receives is based on their need and the size of their portfolio. So need is determined based on the condition of the existing buildings as they report in our database. It's called CPS. And every 5 years, DHCD procures a statewide facility conditions assessment, an actual consultant to go out and make sure that our database that existing needs is current, is accurate. And then CPS catalogs the condition of every building and site in our state portfolio. And the housing authorities then update CPS as projects are completed. And that's how we get accurate information about what the actual need is. CIP, which are a capital plan, will focus mostly on formula funding spending. This is like how much the housing authorities know that they're going to get every year. And they're able to look at like a 1, a 3, and a 5-year plan that will allow housing authorities to be able to prioritize their projects and to help them know when a certain project is going to move forward. There's also other fundings that they can apply for. For example, there's special funds that we have for any kind of asbestos remediation or lead remediation. That's not something that comes out of formula funds. We have sustainability funds that they can apply for. We also sometimes have competitive funds, like a couple of years ago, we had some extra money and we had a competitive round of accessibility improvements that folks got. So as we have money available, when and if we get extra funds available, we really do try to address very specific needs that might be a part of the ongoing maintenance, which is what formula funding tends to address. And so when you look at, when it says pieces of the bond cap pie, you can see that 58% of our bond cap goes to formula funding. And then 23% goes to these kinds of competitive awards that we release and that different housing authorities apply for. And these usually are, besides the special needs that they might address, like accessibility, there's also comprehensive modification to like whole buildings. Sometimes it's siding, kitchen and bath, like bedrooms. I mean, it's very comprehensive, and these special awards can make a really, really big difference. And the competitive awards make a very big difference. Where it says special awards, these are usually like emergency funds. When a housing authority doesn't have enough formula funds and there's no other funds available and an emergency comes up, whether it's, a faulty fire alarm or we've had some emergency septic system failures, those kinds of things, housing authorities can't pay for very comprehensive overhauls like that through their formula funds. They can't usually pay for that very often with those. And so we have these special awards at the 9% that usually cover a lot of those kinds of emergent situations. And then 10% of it goes to paying for staff. So the basics around how a CIP gets put together is the housing authority identifies all the projects that they want to complete in the next 5 years, and then they assign a priority to each project. The projects are arranged in the CIP based on their priority and the cost. Hopefully, we're assuming that those with the highest priority will be entered in the earliest start dates that they can, and those go before some of the things that are lower priorities. Funding sources for each project are selected, and then that's sent over to DHCD for review. Once DHCD can review and approve it, there's an approval that is emailed out to everybody, and a project gets assigned in our active project management system. And then the LHA, once they get the approval letter, the approval email from us, then the housing authority can begin the work on the project. When DHCD reviews the CIP, there are 3 main things that we tend to look for. We look to make sure that the housing authority has appropriately prioritized their projects. So we want to, like, if for example, a leaking roof is in there, we tend to loop, but it's not like within the first year of the CIP when it's been submitted. We will often loop back with the housing authority and say, hey, you have a leaking roof in your plan, but it's 2 years out. Just want to make sure we don't need to move that forward for some reason, or we really do try to like check to make sure that the most urgent needs are being addressed in a timely way. We also like to make sure that we kind of have to make sure that the plan spends within the formula funding limits. They have, we ask that each LHA spends a minimum of 80% of its past 3 fiscal years of awarded formula funding. And an LHA cannot spend more than their available formula funding within the 5-year period. So it is like a kind of block of funds. And we try to make it as flexible as possible against maybe some of the bigger projects being borrowed against future years, or anticipated that there'll be smaller projects in that year to compensate. So we really do try to look at a 5-year block, because some of the formula funding awards for some of the smaller authorities can be pretty small. We don't want some urgent projects to need to be put on hold if they need to move forward. So we try to have the funding available in 5-year blocks so that this kind of planning can actually happen. When the CIP comes in, it gets reviewed by our capital staff. The architects and engineers take the first look to make sure that what's proposed in there makes sense and that they don't have any comments or concerns. And then the DHCD project managers also take the last look, and they look for making sure that the budgets are all fitting in accurately, and that they're scheduled in a way that allows the spending to happen, that allows there to be enough funds for each project. And then before the CIPs come to us, we do require that the LHA board approve the CIP before it gets to us, before we can review and approve it. So you guys might see, your executive director will give you a spreadsheet at a board meeting for your review. They might actually make it look a little bit different, but if they're just pulling it out of our system, out of our software, then you'll see this kind of spreadsheet where it'll name the project name, the development that it is intended to be in, the category, the priority, and which year it's intended to be spent in. And by doing it like this, you can kind of get a sense of how the money is spent across all 5 years, and whether the priority is indeed like what you anticipate it will be. Both the CIP submission and competitive funding applications need to be presented to residents, to the board, and to the board for comments and questions. And the CIP and the competitive funding applications require a letter from the head of the resident organization or representative of the residents that demonstrate that resident participation has been incorporated into the plan or into their application. And this is, we look at this as part of overall regulations, right? That require that residents have strong participation and contribution to any kind of capital improvement project. So these are just some examples of formula funding projects. This is in Lawrence, Massachusetts. You can see before down here, it was, a slope, and it was a lot of patched pavement, and the kids were playing generally over here. And then afterwards, it was, both much safer and much prettier, and a much nicer place for residents to play and interact. Here's another paving, an external project, and also in Lawrence. You can see how before it was a patch of pavement with lawn that didn't get enough water, and it would be really hard for them to maintain. And afterwards, you can see that they had actually built this playground structure, and and have real lawns that were seeded, as well as some of the shavings over there by the swing set. And it's just a much improved site that allowed for a lot more residents to enjoy their space. Just to touch quickly on, when it's not formula funding or when it's not a competitive award, we do have these buckets of special awards or non-competitive funding. One of those, like I had mentioned before, is what we call compliance reserve, and it's used for projects to comply with laws, codes, and regulations. So one of the things, like I'd mentioned before, would be asbestos or lead remediation. Sometimes if there's a reasonable accommodation request that needs to have some changes to the overall structure of a building, the compliance reserve will also help pay for those kinds of things. So it's anything that an LHA might need to comply with local regulations. We have emergency funds. So this is, like I said before, when an LHA has not enough formula funding and an emergency arises that cannot wait for the next year's allocation, then we apply emergency funds. And examples like this might also be when an elevator breaks down and we might need some either emergency service and or an elevator replacement. And like I said, also, like oftentimes emergency awards are for failing septic systems. We also have sustainability funds, and these are for projects to improve energy efficiency or performance. We have a lot of initiatives right now from kind of part of the governor's priority to improve the resiliency in all of our housing authorities. And so, for example, that would really, when we look at climate change and the effects that it has on our environment, we see a lot more flooding, we see a lot more like heat, and we need to make sure that our authorities are able to attend to all of these kind of increased environmental hazards. And so we also have some part of the sustainability funds is to really try to address some of the try to increase the resiliency at our housing authorities. And there's been a lot of work put into identifying what risks each housing authority might have in terms of climate change. The competitive funding is one of the things that we have to do when we have competitive funds is we issue a notice of funding availability, also called a NOFA, and it gets sent out to all of the housing authorities where it outlines how much we have available to contribute to these funds and what the process is for applying for these competitive funds. It also tells people who's eligible and how we're going to score it. And we have a question and answer session for housing authorities before the application due date so that people have an opportunity to get a little bit more nuance that might not have been in the PHN, or maybe ask some questions about how does this pertain specifically to their housing authority. When the housing authority itself writes up their application, the application does require a board member, a board vote to approve it, so that we know that people have, like the board has looked at it, has talked it through with their executive director, and actually has gone through a review process internally. And so that's part of the application. So I'm now going to show a little bit about some of our competitive grants, their competitive funding. So one of the competitive programs is our HILAP, which is a high leverage asset preservation program. And it basically tries to leverage funds that housing authorities get from external sources like CPA funds, CDBG funds. Sometimes the local town will contribute a couple $100,000, like $50,000. I've seen anywhere up to like $200,000 from the town to contribute, and then we match those funds up to 2.5 dollars for every dollar that are not DHCD funds. So, for example, if a local town gives a housing authority $50,000 and then they apply for this program, they will get an extra, right? Was it 10, 100,000, 150, I did quick math in my head, $150,000 in addition, so that it really does encourage participation of other funds, but it also acknowledges that a lot of the work that has to be done also is kind of on the burden of DHCD. A lot of HILAP funds are used to modernize the sites, and we really encourage, when folks apply for this program, we really try to look at a long-term, it's like a long-term commitment to that site. So we were hoping to have around 20 years of useful life out of this type of modernization project. Mod Phase is another program that we have that's competitively funded. It aims to preserve our 667 public housing and with high capital needs, and the 667s, I think, as you guys know, are senior housing and resident developments. And so this one asks for partnerships. Oh, I didn't even do that. Asks for partnerships between the housing authorities and local service agencies, so that when we do the work at the end of the day, when it's all completed, there are actual service agencies that will come in to provide a real comprehensive support system for the residents that live in that development, and the idea is that it will allow residents to age in their community, and it will provide more ways for that development itself to accommodate for aging in place. The Mod Phase grants have to be used for modernization and preservation projects. And so it's there to support the capacity for current and future public housing residents to age, like I said, to age in place. So some of the things that we look at are kitchen and bathroom improvements, major improvements like electrical system improvements, fire protection, plumbing rehab, HVAC systems, those kinds of things. These projects also fund building envelope improvements. So some like roofing plus siding plus windows. I mean, it's very comprehensive. And we also look at site work that really addresses health and safety hazards. And so, for example, you see some of the examples of paving. We really try to make sure that there are smoother pavements, that there's not as many trip hazards, that the tree roots aren't coming up and making it harder to walk. Like some of the site work that we look at is really around making sure that it's an easy place for folks to be outside, to walk around, and to be with each other. And while each Mod Phase application has to incorporate services that benefit residents, Mod Phase funds themselves cannot be used to pay for the service costs, because our money can really only be there to pay for actual construction and construction type projects. And like I mentioned before, there's also accessible unit initiative that we have when we have available funding. So it seeks to improve the availability of accessible units across an entire state-aided portfolio. Only housing authorities that have 0 fully accessible units are in their portfolio or within their program are eligible for the funds. And so the funds can be used to convert existing non-accessible or adapted units into fully accessible units, or it can be used to create new fully accessible units. We also have a couple of other large scale projects. One of them is PHO, which is a partnership. It stands for Partnership to Expand Housing Opportunities. And it provides money for redevelopment of state-aided public housing developments as mixed income, so that there's a replacement, a one-for-one replacement of state-aided public housing and the development of new market rate and or affordable units within that same development. The intent is to leverage the value of the housing authority's land if it's in a strong housing market. For example, in Boston, I know Quincy, and I'm sorry, Chelsea and Somerville housing authorities all have this this money to kind of have this mixed use, mixed income developments. And so private companies and private funds are partnered with our public dollars to do this redevelopment. So you have a portion of it that are state public housing units, and a portion of them that are like private units. The PIHO awards up to a maximum of $250,000 per unit in planning, design, and construction funding for LHAs that have partnered with developers to pursue the project. The other large scale innovation project that we have is our Gateway Cities and Neighborhood Revitalization Program. And this provides capital grants for the redevelopment of state-aided public housing in Massachusetts gateway municipalities. And these gateway cities were determined by the governor's office. And these are communities that have seen a large influx of new residents into their community, and how do we best help to accommodate those? The projects will be significant modernization associated with broader economic development and neighborhood revitalization strategies. So the applications were all about how to have the LHA partner with local like local organizations and local funders to really increase the economic accessibility for new residents and or economically disadvantaged neighborhoods. And it's all part of a larger revitalization strategy that the governor had laid out. Okay, let me just wonder if there are, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I just wonder, I know I went through a lot, and I'm sure you guys have some questions associated with some of the things I went over.